Please welcome the Senior Vice President and General Manager at SAP, Samir Patel.
So let me just be straight with all of you. There is possibly nothing I can say that can top little kids making music out of garbage. So we're going to give it a shot, though. Most of you are from the telecommunications industry, obviously, and so why is this guy from Silicon Valley here trying to school you on a term you invented, the last mile? Hang with me for the next 15, 20 minutes, and I think we'll have some fun. In the last 36 months, there has been a profound disruptive movement underway, piece by piece, where some of the most foundational industries that we've known are being disrupted right before our eyes. And what I'd like to talk to you about today, hopefully, is for us, whether you are a service provider or you are an infrastructure provider, much like Genban, much like my business at SAP, you leave with an understanding of what are some of these disruptive forces and how can you be part of the movement that we're just getting started with. But before we get started, I just have to make sure we can level set on what disruption is. It is probably one of the most overused word and term in the industry, and I hate it for the most part. Why? Because if you look at, and frankly, my industry in the software industry is most guilty of throwing disruption at everything. We will move a button or submit button on a website by 3 pixels and think we've revolutionized stuff, right? We're the worst at it. But the reason why I don't like it is that it gets thrown out pretty loosely and carelessly across a lot of movements and changes that have happened. And if you look back in the last 50 years, my contention is that most of the changes we have seen in technology over the last 50 years have been evolutionary for sure, sometimes transformative, but really not that disruptive. In fact, the best example of disruptive technology, frankly, is your industry, with what the mobile phones did, and entirely changed the paradigm of how we compute, moving from tethered phones to wireless phones to data being important, and now mobile commerce moving on. To me, that is the bar for what we call disruption. And if you look across some of the foundational industries around us, you look at steel, you look at the hoteling industry, you look at restaurant industry, the very nature and concept of those products haven't really changed. A restaurant in 1756 was a place where you went and ate food for about 10x the cost of what you did at home for the convenience and luxury of eating really well. It's pretty much what we do today, right? Steel's in the same area, hoteling is the same. So my bar is pretty high for what we do. So as we go through this and we're talking about disruption, one of the places I actually like to start is a description by Clay Christensen, which I think gets us about 90% there to what I consider to be disruptive. And he describes it as disruptive innovations transform complicated, costly products and services that were previously have been only available to a few people and make them affordable, cheaper products to many people. I like that definition, but I think it's missing one critical piece, which is you need all of that, but if you are not fundamentally changing the very definition of the product, you're not really disrupting anything. You need to change the fundamental definition of the actual product and create something that sells at such high velocity that it starts to move markets in months, and I'm going to show you some examples of what that actually is. And if I look at sort of some of the commonalities amongst these disruptive examples we're going to talk about, one of the things that kind of stepped out, and really when Paul and I were talking about doing this, was one of the things that we had talked about as to why this might be useful, is this notion that a lot of the disruptive ideas are really beginning with the very last mile, and they're looking at that entire experience of what a customer truly wants. And new products and categories of products are actually emerging from starting at that core versus a supply chain down. And so the examples we'll look at today hopefully gives you guys a couple of different scenarios. One is, what does large-scale disruption look like? What does disruption look like when you pluck out segments of established industries and build entirely new industries out of it? And how you can actually be a part of it. The networking industry is the first one that I'd like to focus on. $36 billion is the size of this industry, which includes switches, routers, Ethernet. And if you look at the sort of the raison d'etre of that industry, the idea was, how do we move packets? Packets of information, data that you and I create, move packets around. And this is really not fair to Facebook, but in some ways, if you look at the incarnation of a Facebook, it's really a value-added service in some ways over a network, where they figured out a much more valuable product to put on this network infrastructure. And they did it by not moving packets, but by really focusing on moving our emotions, our impressions, our activities, and social graphs that we have built with the people that we love and we like to be around. And with that came 1 billion people in a mesh network, which is far more difficult to unhinge than the router underneath your desk because of the power of that network. And what does Facebook do with this? They are now looking at, we look at 1.4 billion and think it's a huge market. Well, not when there's 7 billion people on this planet. And when Facebook looks at going after the 5.5 billion people that are not on this, what do? Well, many things, but one of which is they're investing in an open diagram and an open protocol that starts to define what open networking can actually look like to remove proprietary frameworks from controlling how many people can truly connect on the web. And while that may not kill the networking industry, it is clearly going to change the composition of who some of the larger players are as more and more of these people start to come in. By owning the last mile, moving the last mile off networks and into people, they get to wield a lot of control down the supply chain. This is a story purely generated from family. 3 years ago, my then 11-year-old nephew and my 6-year-old son were having a conversation, and my nephew says, they were talking about finding something, and he says, I'm going to go search, I'm going to search Google. And at the same time, my son, who is 6 years old, says, I'm going to search Safari. Think about that for a second. His entire frame for the internet was an iPad or an iPhone. And his portal, his entire portal into the internet, the World Wide Web, is Safari. And he could actually care less what search engine is behind Safari. And this is not about Apple. This could be an Android device and Google. This is not one vendor versus the other. But his whole framing for how he searches the internet shifted when he started with a mobile-first device. The power then now that arguably a device owner has on deciding what engines are used for searching shifts. While search engines are focusing on better algorithms, the providers of web browsers can start to define the categories that we look at. Profound change in terms of who controls that last mile. You know, for each one of these examples that I have in here, there was sort of a word I was looking for in my head that made them good enough to be in this deck. And the one that came to mind, the adjective and the verb that I looked at across this, for this one, what came to mind is just sheer ruthlessness. That's how I describe the change happening on the commerce side. While there were a lot of people down the supply chain of commerce as commerce moved to the mobile infrastructure that tried to own it by embedding the SIM card, embedding commerce into the SIM card, so it's kind of portable, not quite in the control of the device manufacturer. Then you had the application vendors, Starbucks and whoever else, embedding payments and barcodes inside their systems, and Apple said, no, none of that. We're going to embed payments definitively right into the iOS. In Apple's world, in my mind, what was happening before they went at this problem was, again, evolutionary. It wasn't disruptive. What Apple did by embedding payments into the iOS, in a sense, shifted the point-of-sale system away from sellers and put it in the hand of us as consumers. We own the point-of-sale system. It's in our devices now, and we're in control of what we buy. Probably more profound than what happened to a couple of the suppliers in there is really what this means for the financial services business. By owning that last mile, if you sit down and you talk to CEOs of retail financial services organizations, and you ask them what's the biggest threat to your business, the most common answer you will hear is exactly this: is the control that Apple has because it's in the wallets of or in the pockets of every consumer, or so many consumers. And second is the fact that the payment system is embedded into the iOS device. It takes only 3 things to build the biggest, most powerful bank in the world: access to customers, owning the payment systems, and $190 billion in cash and short-term securities is what Apple has. They can be the largest bank on the planet in months, if they so choose to. That's what happens when you control the last mile. Manufacturing, again, you guys, everyone's heard the Tesla story. You know what? In my opinion, in the next 10 years, when we look back at Tesla, I don't believe, frankly, that they will be remembered and revered. They will be remembered, but not revered as the company that created electric batteries. Because by then, all cars will have it, and it'll be a fact in history, no question. We'll know who invented it and who kind of pioneered it. But the thing that they will be known for is the software-first mindset. I look at Tesla, the car, as actually a competitive element to a mobile handset. It essentially owns a captive amount of time of yours while you're in the car, and it controls all of the software that actually comes into your car for that time that it controls you. And if they can show that they can actually change your car transmission sequence with a software update, they can totally put they can OEM the right software and the right commerce and the right applications. And if you think about the location knowledge that they have of where you go, how you work, to me, Tesla equates to an iPad. Think about that and think about how they own that amount of your time while you're in that car, which is arguably going to become self-driving anyway, that they can control the experience. It is not a coincidence in my mind that Elon Musk did not hand off that software piece to Apple and say, hey, can you just stick an iPad in here while I focus on a battery? It wasn't a coincidence. That is competitive advantage to be able to own that much mind share of any one of us. And frankly, look at the multiples in the cloud, in the auto industry, and look at the multiples in the cloud industry. Which one would you like to have? They actually have both now, right? Because they own the software piece. Media, this is not new in any way, but I don't know, how many of you have thought of it this way, but I'll put it out there. It's pretty interesting to me because in this industry, again, by Netflix finding a more convenient way to push applications to us and a cheaper way via renting versus buying, they built, on the backs of the movie studios, built an entire business and a more convenient business, in fact, because it's so data-driven, that they provided you and me with much better experiences on how we consume movies, recommendations on what we do. But by virtue of doing that, what happened? They have a far stronger lock on you and me than a studio house ever has. And last year, in some ways, they actually kicked the media houses to the curb by creating their own content, 7 Emmy nominations for their own produced content. When you own the last mile and you own the relationship with the customer, you again wield a lot of power down the supply chain. You can change the economics of many industries that follow you. This is usually the time in the presentation where I lose all the women, so I'm going to just stay with me for a second, and I'll explain what I mean by that. If you think through retail and what's happening in retail today, the only systematic element of retail today is new goods. New goods are sold through stores, online or offline, but the most fragmented element of retail today is used goods, right? There's just no place where there's a bunch of different places that you can go. You have to look at 5 different places if you're looking for goods. Enter a very interesting startup called Poshmark, which I'm really, really blown away by. What Poshmark does is it focuses on luxury apparel for women only. So this could be, bags, clothes, what have you. And it creates a marketplace where for 20% take, you can sell used bags, handbags, belts, what have you. And the way they look at it is if you can get back 80% of market value at a given time of something, that's somewhere between 50 and 60% discount on buying something new right now. So it's a win-win on both sides. And the used market, turns out, is $18 billion worth for that market. That's bigger than CRM, guys, right? So the example and the takeaway here for you is you don't need to completely change the entire product set in an industry to disrupt it. You can pluck out a very lucrative segment and be really, really good at it and own that segment. And I think anyone here would be happy to own or be a leader in an $18 billion segment. This is the segment that companies like, all the big, any enterprise software company I know would kill to be in that kind of a segment. So all the women come back. Stop downloading the application. We've got a few more slides to go. And then finally, it's, this is one of my favorites. If you look at the $700 billion being spent in the US, spent on food, basically at restaurants. And if you break out every dollar spent, not just at restaurants, but across food for all of us, 31 cents goes to restaurants, and about 13.5 cents is spent on groceries for home. Now, in some ways, the restaurant business is actually a bottleneck in some ways because of the cost, the sheer cost in the restaurant business to keep it up and running, which means that it costs somewhere like 7 to 10x to eat at a restaurant that would actually cost when you made food at home. But no one has time to cook at home. So what do a couple of companies start to do that want to disrupt that model? They start to look at both the demand side and the supply side. Turns out that on the supply side, there's about 10x the number of chefs who would love to cook for any one of us, but they don't have access to a restaurant. And it also turns out that on the demand side, there's a ton of us who would happily eat out if the food was healthy and far less expensive than you would typically spend at a restaurant. So a company called Munchery, which is, again, there's a bunch of these, but this is the one that I've been sort of researching. For about $9, you can get a really well-composed meal that would have cost you $25 at a restaurant. That's about $2 more than a McDonald's a meal, right? So you're at a point now where you have unleashed supply and demand on both sides, and you have moved the last mile away from the restaurant to your own dinner table and created an entirely new market set that a lot of people would be happy to pay for and are paying for. Oh, by the way, the one fact I missed about Poshmark, I talked earlier about driving new products at high velocity. 100 million in revenues in 2.5 years. That's velocity, right? So what is all of this? This is, in my mind, how digital is actually rearranging the pecking order of an entire demand and supply chain, right? Every single one of these examples hopefully gives you a sense of how you can systematically start to take pieces of these supply chains, start to understand where are there commonalities across these, and start to figure out from where you sit, from where we sit as a service provider, from where you sit, how do you start to add those value-add capabilities that can help customers either redefine their own markets or find very narrow chains that have been lost in larger markets like what Poshmark did and create much more sophisticated subsegments in different markets. So what does it take to truly disrupt? I'm going to try to leave you with 4 basic sort of elements here that I think about. The first one, honestly, is on you, right? I would never profess here to understand your business as well as you do. But it is really, if you look across the examples that I provided, every single one of them looked at either either an artificially expensive or, by virtue of just being there for a long time, a very bloated sector of the industry, and found ways to dismantle it. This is what the Muncheries of the world are doing to the restaurant business, where if they took out the cost of real estate, and they took out the cost of what it takes to keep the restaurant running, and they took out all of those, the food multiples and the food costs, and they took really, really good chefs who would want to cook and they could send it to your house, they create an entire new subsegment that is highly, highly lucrative for a lot of people. That's on you to try to think of how you can do that. The other 3 things, I think, as service providers like us and Genban, there's a lot that we can help with, and let me maybe go through those in a second. The first one is, data-first experience design. We heard a lot about this. David talked about it, Paul talked about it. We heard elements of how companies are building around experience. I can guarantee you this, not a single example that I showed there on stage decided that they're going to deploy and use a straight-up CRM system or an ERP system to run that business. In the new age, in those disruptive business models, your product is the SFA. Every single move on Uber, in your Tesla, on Munchery, is data, implicit data being collected on you and me as a consumer and added to our profile without anybody lifting a finger. And if your business from the ground up is not data-driven to collect this kind of information, you're already behind. So the first question to you becomes, how do you leverage platforms that allow you to abstract these technology investments you've made for the last 20, 30 years and be able to build obnoxiously good experiences for every consumer by pulling just pieces of those data systems that you need. If you need invoice data coming from some, you look at an Uber application, think about the complexity behind that application. Invoices, how to pay drivers, where you show up, your credit card, all of that information is all happening magically at the back. All you're watching is a cab showing up at your house, right? That's it. But you've got to figure out how to abstract yourself from those and leverage platforms that can help you grow and scale into that. The second one is owning the relationship graph. That's our business. We help customers do that, whether it's building customer networks or it's building employee networks. We scaled to over 18 million subscribers on this platform in 3 years. That's where we can help. We help, and either way, you need to start to own that relationship graph. Facebook would have never had the kind of control that they have had they not had tight network relationships between those users. That gave them the leverage to be able to dictate what happens downstream. And then speed of execution. I think this is a really important one where you have to be clear, whether you're a service provider or you're a disruptor, either way, you have to be super clear on what are the things, if you're a service provider, for example, like Genband, like us, how do you take certain things that you're really good at out of the equation for your customers so they can focus on their core competencies and rely on you to bring these elements that are going to be critical to how they execute, right? So, you know, speed of execution, like I said, getting from 0 to 100 million was incredibly important for a company like Poshmark. I can guarantee you they try to build their own networks and unified communication, all these things, they'd be still building technology today, right? So how can you be a value-added provider to these companies that are either looking to defend against disruption or be first-round disruptors themselves and provide those elements that help these customers succeed? So that becomes really a critical sort of element of this whole thing. So with that, a lot of this can sound daunting. It's actually really, really exciting. We are, in my mind, again, like I said in the beginning, at the early stages of dismantling foundational industries as we've known them. And it's a privilege for all of us to be doing what we're doing, to start to figure out how we play a role in this, how we play a part in this. And I hope you got some ideas through this presentation today to figure out how you can pave your own last mile. Thank you.